Go on.
Skin. You used to live on my shaft, but some MD just cut you off.
Warning, this podcast contains violence, sexuality, gore, and other horrible and disturbing things. Listener discretion is advised. Also, the hosts of this venture are ignorant dipshits, so please do not take anything they say as fact. And enjoy the show.
Now, are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then we'll begin.
Today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be.
It is our basic human right to be fuck up.
A second plane now has crashed into the other tower of the World Trade Center.
Putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
The defendant shall be incarcerated for the rest of her natural life with no possibility of parole.
You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men.
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold.
Occultae Veritatis.
Okay. I'm sure you wondered why I gathered you here today. Oh, wait. Oh yeah, we're doing something. Hello, and welcome to Occultae Veritatis podcast. I am Ood Gallifrey, and in studio with me,
Dave Murray,
Richard Bigley,
Bambi,
and Valhalla.
And we're welcoming Bambi as a guest presenter on this episode because he is collabing with me on this episode.
Why do you pronounce things so weird?
What do you mean?
And he is collabing.
You make it sound like a real controversy.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Collabing.
We are smushing our research together hard and fast.
That's better.
And yeah, but before we dive into the very real and horrifying reality of humanity, which is concentration camps and detention camps, we need a little bit of poison.
I'm so excited.
Yeah.
So, what's your poison?
So it looks like we have two types of booze, but they look like they're the same brand.
They're two different beers, but they are from the same brewer. They're both from Germany.
Ooh.
I couldn't actually tell what the difference was.
The colors.
One is green and one is purple. One is called the Aventinus Weissen Doppelbock, and the other one is Hopfenweisse Weissen Doppelbock. They're both Weissen Doppelbocks.
I guess the one's probably got more hops in it.
Yeah, I want the one that's not Hoppen Doppelbock.
Well, this is the
one.
Weissen Doppelbock.
So I have one purple one open, and I'll open one green one, and we'll start with that.
A Doppelbock is an extra strong, rich, and weighty lager characterized by an intense malty sweetness with a note of hop bitterness to balance the sweetness.
You've danced under the name Weighty Lager.
300 pounds and I cut down trees. Weighty lager time.
Okay, I love it.
He's a lumberjack and he's okay.
Can I
sleeps all night and he works all day.
What do you need?
I like that. That's good. I had the green one. That's
the green one was really sweet.
That's a green one.
Liquid. That's my favorite state of beer.
I like both of them. They're both really good.
I liked the green one more. The green one is the Hopfenweisse, and they're both Weissen Doppelbocks. That one is the Aventino. The purple one is the Aventino. I preferred the Hopfenweisse, but they're both good.
They're both really good.
Yeah,
these are huge bottles, and I got 4 of each. And we've only opened one of each, and we're all going to get wasted if we open more than that.
I'm okay with that.
They're 8.2%.
For science.
But yeah, they are both 8.2%. They're both going to, kick our teeth in a little bit. And that's all the better because we have some dark shit to talk about today.
I like the green one more. That little kick of hops just makes it.
The green is so sweet, though.
It's sweet, but it just really works.
Wait. The green one is the extra hoppy one because it has hops in the fun German name, right?
This is the green one.
The purple one.
I'm double fisting.
Purple is like super sweet.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why I preferred the green one. Can I taste the purple again?
Finish him.
I like them both. I think the green one is less offensive, and the purple one is more chatty.
Doppelbox.
More chatty.
You heard me.
No, I take it back. They're both very good. I don't prefer one over the other.
Mm-hmm.
Doppelbox were first brewed by the Pauliner monks in Munich. At the time, it was intended to be consumed as liquid bread during Lent.
Sweet. So we are being godly.
Bread. The green one is a 5 out of 10 because it tastes like, I don't know, eating a pond.
No.
Yes, it tastes like plants I used to eat as a child on the fences of neighbors.
Hey, Leon, what would you rate this beer?
0.
I would rate it 8 industrial machines out of a possible 7
16
suffragettes.
Cessnas 172
Child
up my
laborers.
urethra.
Yeah, in my foreskin. Yeah.
Rest in peace, Leon Filger.
One
He
red.
got too high.
Tell us which one you think this is, and send your thoughts to us at feedback@offpod.ca.
Yeah.
And if you get it right, we may just send you some merchandise.
Something neat.
Probably some pubic hair, but we'll send you something
That
maybe.
is to be sold. Thank you very much.
It's not a promo item. OVPod pubes aren't a promo item. They gotta be sold.
Go to
The deal is they will be sold based on volume.
I'm registering ovpod.ovpubes.com.
Oh my god.
So a rental foreskin is for all the people who were circumcised against their will as children.
Like Ood.
And
poor foreskinless Ood.
And need. That's him playing the remnants of his foreskin.
It sounded like the beginning of My Heart Will Go On, like from the Titanic.
That's why I stopped, because I was drifting into My Heart Will Go On.
My foreskin does not go on.
In my dreams,
I see you, I feel you. That is how I know you. Go on.
Foreskin. You used to live on my shaft, but some MD just cut you off.
You're far wherever you are.
Probably in a landfill. I don't know, it was a long time ago. The bacteria probably digested you, but I miss you nonetheless.
Sad Leon's missing this.
Okay, well, I rate the purple beer 8 out of 10, and the green beer also 8 out of 10.
The purple
but
beer
but you guys are all wrong about how the green beer tastes. It does not taste like ponds or hops. It tastes like delicious juice.
It tastes like a pond that you want to try and fish in, but your parents tell you no, there's no fish in it because it's a slough.
No, it's
like
sweet.
in like a good way. I'm not saying it's bad. Like I'd still drink it, but
it tastes like juice.
Whereas the purple is like it tastes like drifting off to sleep. It's beautiful and perfect and velvety.
Oh my god, drifting off to sleep sounds so good right now.
It tastes like a velveteen rabbit. Thank you.
Yes, Kay, the purple does tastes like drifting off to sleep, but the green tastes like juice.
Like an irresponsible adult.
I don't remember. I'm like half cut.
When I was researching the surrender tree and when I was writing about those wars for independence from Spain, I was actually tremendously shocked to learn that Cuba was the first place where there were formal concentration camps. And from that time on, once it was done in Cuba, it seemed like one country after another, one war after another all over the world started to use this method of brutally herding hundreds of thousands of peasants into fenced, guarded enclosures and leaving them there with no sanitation, food, or medicine. Just basically herding them into concentration camps and leaving them to die. They were called campamentos de reconcentración at that time. They were called reconcentration camps. And it was an idea that one of the Spanish generals had, and I think it's amazing that it's not better known. I think it's really shocking that it's not better known. This history for me was also personal because I had heard all my life that my great-grandmother, my great-grandparents, both of them, and their youngest child at the time, had to go to another place. They were on a farm, and they had to go to another place during the final War for Independence from Spain. And I didn't know what had to go to another place meant until I started reading about those three concentration camps.
We need to make a little disclaimer as we're going forward, because we're going to talk about some really atrocious, inhumane things, and we're going to do it in sort of an impersonal way. And we want to make it very clear that these things are very bad, and we don't like them, and we don't condone them, and we want them to not happen.
We don't think they're funny either.
I feel that a lot of the times on the podcast, we've given our listeners like a good amount of benefit of the doubt. I think that our listeners can recognize the inhumanity and like the atrocious morals and the harm being done as we kind of sometimes dispassionately talk about these things we're going to talk about.
So just making that little disclaimer at the start. As we go into it, basically we're going to talk about concentration camps. But to understand what a concentration camp is, before we get into that, we should talk about concentration camps are not prisons, either like civil prisons or prisoner of war camps, nor are they refugee camps. Where like a prison, if it's like a civil prison in like in Canada and the US, whether they're run by the government or a company or whatever, like a civil prison, if it's being operated correctly, it is for people who have been convicted of a crime to be denied liberties as a punishment for that. Sometimes, depending on the country you're in, that may include some rehabilitory action. In like Denmark, when you get out of prison, you're billed for your time, but they're also, you get like job placement out of prison so that you'll be able to pay off your prison stay. So it's not as directly taxpayer funded. There's some very interesting ways to do it. I don't like a lot of how we do prisons in North America. That's not what a concentration camp is. It's also not a prisoner of war camp. Prisoner of war camp is basically if you're a country that's at war with someone and you capture some of their prisoners. It used to be, back in the old days, you could just kill them maybe if they're going to be inconvenient, but also they might be like useful to haggle back, and maybe you'll get some of your soldiers back for trading soldiers, or maybe you've captured an officer and they're worth something. So there's some ransom to be had, or later on after various, I think it was the Geneva Convention establishes it, where once someone has surrendered, they're a non-combatant and they shouldn't be killed. That's a war crime. So you have to feed them, like basically give them enough food to be like healthy, and basically just not torture or kill them or whatever.
Right.
And then at the end of hostilities, once peace has been established, they are to be released.
All that was set out in the Third Geneva Convention.
Thank you.
And I mean, I assume that the prisoners were also probably helpful in terms of, kind of administrating some of the functions of the camp itself. Is that
prisoner of war camps have been handled very differently at different times by different people. Okay. I will talk about the sort of the first like physically built prisoner of war camp, or prisoner of war prison, a prison specifically intended to be for prisoners of war, in a little bit, but like in some places in like Nazi Germany, a prisoner of war camp is really where you didn't want to be, in a lot of cases. Slightly less bad than their concentration camps, which we're going to get into, but still very bad. The same was, prisoner of war camps are never really pleasant places, but there may be different degrees of how bad they were.
Yeah, and like when we're talking about this stuff and we're saying words like better or more humane, like sometimes it's not much better. Like if you're staying at a place that'll chop off 4 of your fingers instead of 5, that's technically better.
Yeah. Better doesn't mean good. It means less bad.
Yeah.
Like when you talk about like, oh, something could be the best. Like the best prisoner of war camp is really just the least worst.
Yeah.
Still shitty.
Yeah.
But maybe less shitty.
So then, in addition, so there's not, those are prisons, either for civil use or for prisoners of war. And then there are refugee camps. Refugee camps are intended to be for basically, like someone who you've fled your home, you're a refugee because it was dangerous for you to stay at home, and you've gone to some other place. Typically, a refugee camp, they're intended to be temporary. They're the least worst of these places in most cases. Obviously, there have been cases where refugee camps have been quite not good.
Generally, the idea is to be able to like sustain a minimum level of, I guess, standard of living amongst as many people as you can with the limited resources you have in that location, and
with the intention of like resettling people somewhere else. Like it's not intended to be, in a lot of places they aren't allowed to build permanent structures because the intention is for a refugee camp to be moved on. The average number of people in a refugee camp is something like 11,000 people.
That's a lot of people.
But it's a lot less than like the most populous refugee camp. I don't actually have that number in front of me. But
it's intended to be temporary. With what they've got to cram is, make the most use out of the least amount of resources you can to the most amount of people on a temporary sort of basis.
And like this intention to be temporary has not always been successful. Like there have been the same refugee camp for like 15 or 20 years in certain places, and they have had populations that have swelled to be quite significant, where you're all living out of tents or like very simple structures that are like very limited. Kids have grown up in refugee camps, and like I don't want to like be an apologist for refugee camps, but the intention is not like the reason that people don't leave refugee camps if they're bad is more likely to be because they aren't technically allowed to like enter the country that they're already in, rather than because they are being forced to stay in this place. They just don't have the means to go somewhere else. It's not good, but it's not for the same reason that concentration camps exist.
The most populous refugee camp is currently, as far as I can tell, Kutupalong in Bangladesh, where they have Rohingya Muslims, and there are 630,000 people living there.
All right.
That's which is the city size of Saskatoon.
That's like 3 times.
Yeah.
Or 2 and a bit, whatever.
2 and a bit, yeah.
Anyways, yeah, so obviously refugee camps, not something I would recommend, but if you have to choose between a refugee camp and a prisoner of war camp and a concentration camp, refugee camp might be the least worst place to be.
Still shitty, but maybe less shitty.
And hopefully like humanitarian efforts should be making them continue to be even less shitty. But concentration camps are what we're talking about today. And the function of a concentration camp is that some group of people in power will decide that to target a group and concentrate them into an area for some reason, usually to maintain the power of the group that is in power, whether it's because a group is perceived to be like a national security threat in big fucking air quotes, or in early cases there were like farmers in certain areas who would help out the guerrilla fighters who were doing a revolution, and so they took all the farmers and they concentrated them in a camp where they were no longer able to farm. There was not enough food, and it's like, well, good luck. Eat as much as like here's 3 people's worth of food for 18 of you. Good luck.
Right.
Would you consider the reservation system in Canada to have been a concentration camp? At least initially,
it's like a concentration system. It's on my list to talk about. It's like individual reservations. The way Canada dealt with it is very weird. Individual reservations could be considered like there were times when you had your Indian agent, you weren't allowed to leave the res without a pass. Like
that whole thing
is a very like that sure looks like concentration camps.
Yeah, gotta have your papers.
And
that rings to some things.
There are lots of things. Like obviously they didn't do just one big camp to concentrate everyone, so it's a little like no one has like even like the Nazi Germany. There wasn't just one camp. There were several, and there were a few really big ones. But yeah, I think and actually it is on my list to talk about that. Like and North American, like the way the U.S. has handled it as well is.
We're just like
concentration campy. Like it's
like humans are just looking for other reasons to be shitty to other humans. I think
Canada is a really good case study for it, where you look at the people in power, meaning like the
settler colonial.
The colonial white folks out east specifically, looking out west and seeing a lot of resources that they could have access to if it wasn't for all those pesky Indians, and coming up with legislation to make it totally illegal to persecute and treat poorly all of these people who already lived here, and well, it's our land now because we said so and we have guns. Basically, so
you signed off for it under false pretext, and
and because if you didn't sign, we were going to roll in with our Northwest Mounted Police were going to roll in with some Gatling guns and way more horses than you can have, and we were going to just take care of you anyway. This is honestly, in a lot of cases, the First Nations people who signed treaties were the chiefs in a lot of cases knew that it wasn't a good deal, but they also knew that it was the least worst thing that they could do for their people, because they didn't have the resources to fight back anyways.
Well, especially here in Treaty 6 territory, they actually had a medicine chest clause. That was one of the only ones in the country.
I got a friend who still collects his $5 a year.
Yeah.
As was stipulated in the treaties. I mean, I guess back in the 1800s that was a little bit more than what it is today, but no, it still says $5 and they're still entitled to it. So they go and he collects it as a symbol of treaty. But
and let's be honest, inflation existed back then too.
Yeah, well, and they knew, and that was a deliberate ploy. So anyhow, so going into sort of the history of it, because we do want to talk about this episode, we're talking about everything, all sort of concentration camps related to pre-World War.
Yeah. This might feel a little bit like we're beating around the bush, but at least for this first episode, but I think it's important to establish a good ground basis before we talk about the concentration camps of the world wars and concentration and detainment camps that are existing and operating as we speak today.
Yes. And everyone's heard of the concentration camps from Nazi Germany, not to diminish their importance and stuff, but I think it's important to know kind of where they started.
But really, as long as humans have gathered in groups and have done politics, have done war, we have found reasons to house each other. And often when we found reasons to house each other, we did it for bigoted, discriminatory reasons. They weren't part of our culture. They're a different race than us. They're a different group of people. They're helping the enemy. And often we, throughout history, we didn't have much of a care towards the humanitarian needs of these people that we were housing. There's some light points. At one point, I'm going to say there was a high point in the Dark Ages, but some concepts of prisoners' rights and detained people's rights rose up throughout this, but for a long time humans have been abusing people when they've detained people. Yeah, so going back to the Roman times in antiquity, so Rome considered people in a very economic way, in a very dispassionate way. They saw value in people in terms of war power and money,
especially non-Romans. A Roman was a step up a little bit, and obviously there were different levels within that.
And there's some signs that they incorporated other cultures into theirs, but really even that was dispassionate and cruel, because they would take over another culture and they would say, okay, take 5% of these people, we can invite them back to be Roman citizens, the rest will be slaves. And it's they wanted to a little bit and piece of each culture. They didn't care about the humanity and the well-being of 95% of those people.
They wanted the rich people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was very common in daily Roman life to see prisoners of war acting as servants or laborers in Roman cities. So if you're a Roman citizen, you would often see slaves in the streets. You see slaves erecting monuments, and typically victors made very little distinction between enemy combatants and enemy civilians. So often in campaigns, when they were capturing people who they considered a foreign enemy or non-Romans, they would house them together. And the way they would house them together is they wouldn't distinguish between soldier and citizen. They were all one big group of people.
They would just schmoz them all together.
Oh, yeah. And that showed that, this isn't really a POW camp. This isn't really a prisoner of war camp. They're not just capturing the soldiers. They're all the civilians of one ethnic or cultural group are being housed together.
Right.
So slave labor built the great monuments of the Roman Empire. Most slaves, POWs, but a lot of them came from just the civilians of people they conquered. By Julius Caesar's time, the taking of slaves by the thousands became an essential part of the Roman economy. Like, the Roman economy had trouble functioning without their slave force. A lot like the prison-industrial complex today. A lot of that prison-industrial complex covers a lot of economic room.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the purpose of a battle was to capture women. If these people were attacking the Romans, the Romans were attacking back, and they needed to house these soldiers in the meantime, that would be one thing, but they went on conquests specifically to attack certain groups of people and house them together for the value of Rome. Like, there's a practice known as rapido, where they would purposely go into some foreign nation and they would, for the purpose of capturing the women in that nation so that they could be brought back to Rome as sex slaves.
Ew.
I know, like, we have a conception of Rome today is like, oh, they wore togas and they were kind of silly and they built lots of, like, big marble things, but they were a very vicious and fascistic nation that was cruel to so many groups of people.
In 146 BC, when Rome finally conquered her first great enemy, Carthage in North Africa, her destiny changed dramatically. Suddenly a world power, Rome commanded not only Italy, but most of the Mediterranean world. By 140 BC, Rome was still a democratic republic, but now she was also undeniably an empire, controlling more than 250,000 square miles. More than 4 million people lived under Roman rule. The great wars of expansion brought a tidal wave of riches back to Rome, a flood of instant wealth that acted like gasoline on the flames of a young economy. Spoils of war included art, jewelry, gold, and other finery, along with a different kind of commodity, slaves. Now that Rome was a world power, the rules of the game changed dramatically. Conquered peoples were no longer guaranteed citizenship or any benefits of empire. Now, if you lost the war, you were probably taken captive.
If you were conquered by a Roman general and you weren't killed, you would be a slave. And it didn't matter if you were a blonde, blue-eyed German, or a dark-eyed Macedonian, or a dark-skinned, dark-eyed Ethiopian. That wasn't the point. The point was you had been conquered. You were inferior because you had been conquered by the superior Romans.
About 250,000 soldiers were captured in the wars against Carthage, and countless more slaves came from other battle zones. 150,000 Greeks, 100,000 Gauls, tens of thousands of Germans, Spaniards, Syrians, Thracians, and Jews all became Roman against their will.
For example, the Holy Island of Delos. So, like, one of the territories of Rome acted as a major slave market. And, of course, the slave market had a lot of housing rooms.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times it was just people held in wooden pens like cattle until they were sold. They were provided with very, very little materials. This is how active it was and how much this market participated. On high days of the year, they sold up to 10,000 slaves a day.
Holy fuck.
Oh, yep. Wow.
The slaves in Rome dug the mines, ranched the animals, taught the children, practiced medicine on the sick, provided the grunt work, and entertained the masses as gladiators.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
I have a friend in Rome.
Yeah.
It's like basically like a
biggest
armor that case.
Oh, yeah. So you see,
he has a wife.
Even back in
Her
Rome,
name Incontinentia. Incontinentia buttocks.
Yes.
So this is the point where I say that housing people against their will took a little bit of a positive upswing in the Dark Ages.
Right.
And the positive upswing I mean is that people became known as commodities instead of just scum that should be exterminated, like some of the Romans thought of some of their foreign combatants.
Right.
So it's not like people of the medieval times like assigned some humanitarian value to these people. It's not like they said like, well, we shouldn't kill this person that we're housing against their will because they have human rights and they don't deserve cruelty.
It's that they're useful to our society. So they became like iPhones.
I don't know. Just thinking in terms of prisons, though, it's still not like we've ventured far off from that definition, though.
We have not.
Yeah, very much so. So because of some influence of chivalry, because of which was kind of like a value that perpetuated throughout society of how like certain business should be done between nations and between knights and between nobles, and because of certain philosophers and church leaders that started to affect medieval times, a new kind of form of dealing with enemy combatants and like civilians that were housed together from foreign nations started to be developed.
Right.
Instead of just killing people or housing them in shitty conditions where they're most likely to die, they were worth way more money than that. For example, if you were in medieval times and you captured an experienced archer and you kept that archer in good health as you were housing him, when the war was over, that archer's home nation could provide up to 150 shillings for his release.
Oh.
That's 4 million Canadian dollars.
Shut the fuck up.
I don't know how much shillings are worth.
I was like, how the fuck do you know?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay, you got me.
When?
The way you said it with such confidence.
I know. That's why I believed it.
4 million Canadian dollars.
Just to give you guys an idea of how much.
10,000 points to you, Mr. Bambi.
Yeah, and 150 shillings was about a year's salary for an archer. So an archer in an
like
army...
60 grand.
So it's $60,000.
Yeah.
Like, that's decent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you have a whole army of captured people...
Tons of money back in the day.
Yeah. In a single transaction, absolutely.
Absolutely.
So you capture the archer. What happens if you captured, like, I don't know, a warrior, like a social justice warrior or something? What would you get for those?
Well, that's where some of the darkness comes in. I said it got better, but it wasn't good. Like if you captured experienced warriors, if you captured knights that had ties to noble families, if you captured officers, they could be ransomed for good money. If you captured a warrior that just came from a peasant's village, if you captured one of the many ethnic groups they considered like toxic, like there was Romani slaves back in medieval times. Like the medieval people, like if you were a group that they didn't like, they wouldn't provide the same courtesy to you.
Right.
You would be housed in the same shitty conditions. And like it's not like modern concentration camps. They wouldn't build a special facility for you. Usually they would throw you in the jail cells of the city that existed or whatever capturing facility. And like if you were valuable, they'd house you in the good places. But if you were shitty, they'd throw you in the dungeon with the rest.
Right.
And it became a housing facility where people would die at a high degree if you belonged to the wrong group of people.
Mm-hmm.
As according with medieval society.
Would they do prisoner exchanges?
Oh, often. Sometimes they would trade noble for noble. Sometimes they would trade like if it was like a noble's son, they'd trade him for like a fleet of archers and stuff like that.
Okay.
And, oh yeah. This is another example of people that were housed because they belonged to the wrong certain cultural group of people. The Aztecs were constantly at war with neighboring tribes, groups, and cultures of people, and their goal of this constant warfare was to collect live prisoners for sacrifice. What was the name of that pyramid?
Hoba?
Tenochtitlan.
Tenochtitlan.
I have not been to that one.
Yeah. So there was this pyramid. Built by the Aztecs, and the Aztecs had a habit of. They believed that the more sacrifice and the more blood spilt upon the steps of their new buildings, the more blessed by the gods they would be. So for the opening of that pyramid, between 10,000 and 80,000 people were sacrificed,
which is a huge margin.
Yeah,
you might notice that in fact, from the lowest number, there's like a 700%. Variability there.
Oh hell yeah. Yeah, it's because records weren't as well kept back then, and plus like the Aztecs seeing as like this like a glorious event, like they had kind of like some motivation to like fudge the numbers.
Yeah.
So like that's kind of like estimates. But just like anything else, when enemy combatants were captured, sometimes they were mixed in with civilians, and whether you were put in a sacrificial cell by the Aztecs, or whether you were put in like one of their like die slowly cells without being sacrificed to the gods, often depended on which like cultural or ethnic group you belonged to as the Aztecs attacked. So there was some mix of prisoner of war, but of course these Aztecs housed people in mass while they were waiting to be sacrificed.
Conquistadors once wrote of an enormous rack of skulls, called a Zompantli, in the 16th century Aztec city of Tenochtitlan. A row of vertical posts connected by crossbeams, threaded with human skulls, flanked on each side by towers of skulls and mortar. The Mexica, the founders of Tenochtitlan, and one cultural group that comprised the Aztecs, thought human sacrifices would feed the gods and ensure the continued existence of the world. For the conquistadors, the skulls evinced the Mexica's barbarism and justified their conquest of the city in 1521. They tore down the Templo Mayor and the Zompantli in front of it, paving over the ruins and building what would become Mexico City. As the centuries passed, historians began to wonder if the Zompantli had ever existed at all. In 2015, researchers discovered a site that would remove any doubts about the Zompantli's existence when they excavated the remains of the rack in one of the towers, underneath a colonial period house on the street just north of Mexico City's cathedral. The team dug about 20 test pits, unearthing modern debris, colonial porcelain, and finally, the basalt slabs of a Mexica period floor. As they dug, hundreds of skull fragments began to appear, but they weren't sure that's what they were seeing until they found the post holes. The size and spacing of the holes allowed them to estimate the Zompantli's size. It turned out to be an incredibly imposing rectangular structure, 35 meters long, about 14 meters wide, and an estimated 4 to 5 meters tall. They also discovered one of the towers made of skulls and mortar. Over 2 seasons of excavations, archaeologists carefully collected a sample of 180 skulls from the tower, as well as thousands of skull fragments, hoping to learn more about Mexica rituals and the post-mortem treatment of the bodies. Human sacrifice and even Zompantlis were relatively common in many Mesoamerican cultures. Cut marks on the skulls leave no doubt they were defleshed after death, and the decapitation technique seemed quite clean and uniform.
I'll hand it back to Bambi for the next leg, but those are kind of like the ancient precursors to modern concentration camps, where people were housed against their will and mistreated horribly.
And like as we move forward through time, like you see the Crusades again, we see, the Crusaders were encouraged to kill indiscriminately because God will know His own, and of course that was a foreign arm, an army going away from their country to invade somewhere else. They certainly aren't going to take the time to build camps for their prisoners that they're capturing. Like they just don't have the resources for that. And if you know anything about the Crusades, like they really barely had the resources for what they managed to do. But as we move forward in time, obviously prisoners of war were continuing to be sort of fairly big business getting through the Middle Ages into the Renaissance and all that. So into the late 1700s, during the Napoleonic Wars, the construction of the Norman Cross prison occurred. It was built by the Royal Navy with the intention of housing prisoners of war from France, basically. And this was intended to be like the best, like a prison that showed, the British people, we're the British and we're so good that even our prisoners are well cared for.
Oh man.
Is the idea.
Yeah.
So if you were like, say for example, you were like French nobility and you were captured and you were here, it was probably pretty good. Actually, there are several cases of, high-ranking prisoners who were allowed parole. They were allowed to go visit some of the nearby towns, which included some fairly large cities like Plymouth. I can't remember where the list of that was. But including some of those people who were granted parole ended up getting married and staying in England once they were freed.
In your research, did you see that? Did you find that these decisions were coming more from a humanitarian, these people deserve to be happy place, or more from let's keep our prisoners in good health because they're worth more that way place?
I don't think there was a clear... From what I found, there wasn't really a clear distinction either way.
I'd venture a guess at let's keep our prisoners healthy because they're worth more.
Yeah, I would guess that it was that. Like, as far as... Also a little bit of, like, if you keep your prisoners well, I think part of it was the British government around this time sued... or like complained to the French government because they had paid money to the French government to pay for clothes for all the British prisoners.
Yeah.
And they were complaining that the British prisoners were still dying in their camps. So the guys, we paid for their clothes. Like, you got to fucking take care of them.
Yeah.
Or give them the fuck back.
Yeah.
And so I think it was kind of also a thing of like, we're going to do good. You better fucking do good. Or we're going to roll in with our navy that is the power in the waters right now.
Yeah, let's show these French frogs how we do it. Yeah.
So, if you were like a high-ranking person at that Norman Cross, pretty good time.
Yeah.
If you weren't, it wasn't necessarily bad, except that you weren't, like, it was not common, but it did happen that people would gamble away all their food and then starve to death.
Oh, no.
Which is still wildly fucked up.
Yeah.
Like... and yes, there were, cases of people did try to escape, so it obviously wasn't so pleasant that, we're just at the summer home waiting for the war to end, so we'll get let go. It was like still a prison. There were walls with cannons facing inwards. There was a yard. There were buildings where you lived with cells.
It was still like you wanted to escape from it. Like it wasn't amazing.
It was very much a prison. It was very much not like a pleasant place to be, but it was built, designed as a prison, and it specifically intended for prisoners of war. So people, like, if it's a prison for civilians, you can guess that they might not know how to, like, they might not be trained in combat.
Yeah.
Whereas there's some sort of considerations there for prisoners of war camps. Also, around the time that this was built, the Panopticon was theorized.
Panopticon.
That's not something Doctor Who would get trapped in.
So the Panopticon is a type of prison that was designed. I don't think they were ever actually built or deployed. But the idea is one guard in a tower in the center of the building can see into any and all cells. The prison guard can't see into all cells at the same time, but the prisoners in the cells can't tell where the guard is looking.
Right.
So at any time, they have to assume that they are being watched. And it's quite terrible, actually. There's a really cool video game called Panoptic that's a VR game. It's an asymmetric multiplayer game that's really cool that kind of is based on this.
Oh.
But the prison layout theory is quite terrible, and okay. I'm way happier that they built Norman Cross than the Panopticon.
That's the Panopticon.
Welcome
Bambi.
to the Panopticon.
Oh, did they build one?
There was a Panopticon built, it seems like in Mexico somewhere.
Oh, great.
Imagine you're at the center of a concrete beehive and you're able to see into all the little honeycombs.
Yeah.
That's kind of what this prison is like.
Yeah.
It seems very scary to me because I'd hate to be the guard in like the middle of it, because if they somehow manage to break out, you don't have anywhere to fucking go, and they can either starve you up or you're stuck there. You're SOL, man.
This is the Presidio Modelo, which is the model prison of a Panopticon built on Isla de Pinos in Cuba.
Cool.
I don't know if it was ever actually used.
A building circular, the prisoners in their cells occupying the circumference, the officers in the centre. By blinds and other contrivances, the inspectors concealed from the observation of the prisoners, hence the sentiment of a sort of omnipresence. The whole circuit reviewable with little or without any change of place. One station in the inspection part affording the most perfect view of every cell.
The Panopticon, in many ways, feels like an extension of Bentham's humanist philosophies. Its core goal is to reform the way that prisoners within prisons live their lives, and in essence, enforce a positive way of life upon all its inhabitants. In his own words, those inside the prisons would have their morals reformed and health preserved. Prisoners could be watched at any moment with no indication that they were indeed being watched. For all they knew, they were always being watched. And as such, their behaviour should therefore be modified, theoretically resulting in better behaved inmates. There was to be no concept of privacy, of secrecy, or lack of judgment. You were under the constant expectation of surveillance, even if it was theoretically impossible. For all the prisoners could know, there may not even be a guard in the watchtower.
We've been talking a lot about Norman Cross and the Panopticon. The Panopticon being the idea being developed during the late 1700s, Norman Cross being built late 1700s into the early 1800s during the Napoleonic Wars.
Yeah.
This was a prisoner of war camp specifically, and the Panopticon would later be developed again as a prison. It was also used for like political prisoners. It's very not a great time. But concentration camps, as we've described them earlier, were first found in Cuba during the war for independence, basically from Spain. It was not like a war between two armies. It was a war between the Spanish occupying forces and the people of Cuba who wanted to be independent. And so obviously there were lots of like people who were like a farmer who really wasn't involved in being an insurgent, but maybe he could like let an insurgent stay the night on his way through, or feed them, or provide them with stuff. And so the Spanish governor general got wise to this and said, like, the only way that we are going to be able to beat these guys properly is by taking all of their support, because there's lots of people who are supporting the actual insurgents. Take all those people and put them somewhere else because they're getting in the way.
Yeah, if these insurgents don't have the support of the surrounding community, they will fall. That was the mindset.
And so this was a guy by the name of, I'm just looking for it,
General Valeriano Weyler.
That was the guy who came later, right?
Yeah.
The first guy. So the guy who had the idea of reconcentration was Arsenion Martínez Campos. Yeah. And he was the governor general of the island. He believed that the only path to victory was in being especially cruel to the people of Cuba by not only targeting the fighters, but targeting the civilians as well. So to isolate the rebels from just the peasants, he developed the strategy called reconcentration, which was basically make concentration camps for the civilians.
Yeah.
But he also said, because he's a fucking coward, instead of being a good person, he said, this is a very cruel thing. I can't do it. So send someone else to do it. I'll go back to Spain and take a pension. You can send someone else to do this horrible thing that I'm telling you is the only way to win.
Oh, no.
Instead of, so he's basically just a fucking coward instead of just taking up arms with the obviously right independence movement.
He's like, the only way we can capture Cuba is if we subjugate and do genocide and all the there's no other way, but I can't do it. We have to send somebody else.
Yeah. So like if you kind of don't look very long, it's like, oh, he's kind of a good guy. He didn't want to do genocide, but he also was like, how about you just send someone else to do the genocide?
Yeah, that's a huge indicator and a huge note of like, hey, so this is real messed up and it's super not okay and I'm not all for this. But this is how it needs to happen if this is what you want to accomplish.
So if this guy slides into your DMs, fucking block him.
Yep.
Exactly.
100% fucking block him as soon as he's in your DMs.
So Martínez Campos was recalled to Spain, and in his place they sent General Valeriano Weyler, nicknamed the Butcher, who was such an asshole that the New York Times in 1896 wrote, if he cannot make successful war upon the insurgents, he can make war upon the unarmed population of Cuba.
Oh, no.
Which is basically like what he did.
Yeah. He didn't really separate like enemy combatant and enemy civilian. They were all slain, they were all captured, they were all housed as if they were one entity. Because like as he defined it, the civilians are basically he thought that the civilians are basically enemy combatants because they're helping the enemy combatants. Yeah, so the Boer War was the British taking some arguable lessons from the news they received about how the Spanish took action in Cuba. They took it to their territories in southern Africa. So in 1900, during the Boer War, the British began relocating more than 200,000 civilians, mostly women and children, behind barbed wire into bell tents or improvised huts. Something that changed how concentration camps were done and what made them pop up more numerously and in greater number and have greater amplified death is, the industrialization of war. the invention of barbed wire and the invention of like easily reproducible metals and like materials made building facilities much quicker and much easier. And the invention and proliferation of automatic weapons made it so that you didn't need so many soldiers to control thousands of people. You just needed a few trained that are good with guns.
Yeah,
good with machine guns and
something belt fed.
Some barbed wire around them, so that you can't just bum rush them.
Yeah.
The rat-a-tat-a-tat
no
gun.
one wants to be the first person to dive on a bunch of barbed wire to let their friends climb across.
No.
To get to the guy with the gun.
Yeah. Now, to be clear, the Boers were Dutch settlers in Africa, so they did descend from colonialists themselves, but that doesn't mean that they don't have humanitarian rights. And the way they were subjugated and put in camps and tortured by the British was beyond the pale.
Right.
More people died in these camps than in combat.
Wow.
So live combat with live fire. And again, they had automatic fire at this time. More people died in those camps than in there. It's polluted water, lack of food, infectious diseases, ended up killing tens of thousands of detainees.
During Smuts' raid into the Eastern Cape, when he was operating in the Suurberge, which now incidentally forms part of the Addo Elephant National Park as a matter of interest, the Times even reported that this band of resolute men, led by General Smuts, formed one of the most amazing aspects of the guerrilla war.
To end this guerrilla warfare, the British adopt brutal methods to crush further Boer resistance.
Firstly, Lord Kitchener's scorched earth policy had resulted in women and children being removed from the farms, the livestock being slaughtered. It had deprived the Boers in the veld with their ability to live off the veld and to source supplies from these different homesteads.
The harsh treatment of Boer women and children provoked Smuts and his men to fight on with renewed desperation and anger. British welfare campaigner Emily Hobhouse brings world attention to the plight of the Boer women and children.
He was a dear little chap of about 4, and all that was left of him were big brown eyes and white teeth set in lips stretched back, too thin to close. He was emaciated. It's difficult to describe what it's like to see all those children in a state of collapse. After a while, they carried the corpses out at dawn, and instead of passing through the town, went to the cemetery another route. The sudden realization of the death rate dawned upon me. It was a death rate which had never been seen except in the times of the Great Plagues. The whole talk was of death. Who died yesterday, who lay dying today, and who would be dead tomorrow.
The war, which lasts for 2.5 years, witnesses the loss of over 4,000 Boer combatants and 22,000 British soldiers. 28,000 Boer women and children and 14,000 black inmates died in British concentration camps. Many of them were dumped in the veld in makeshift camps after their farmhouses were burnt down as a result of Kitchener's scorched earth policy. The brave but beleaguered Boers, having lost their republics and suffered much, eventually submit to defeat with the signing of the Peace Treaty of Vereeniging.
Your chance of dying in one of these camps was 4 in 10.
Holy shit.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
That's insane.
It's like a little less than a coin flip.
Yeah.
And like, these are the Boers. These are the Dutch settlers that descended from the people that came. What's not mentioned a lot in the Boer War is the camps that were set up for the black African people that were there. They were put into camps and tortured, mistreated, just like the Boers were. But unsurprisingly, their death rates were often a lot higher. Up in the 60s, up in the 70s. Like, your chance of dying in one of these camps just from maltreatment and dehydration and starvation or whatever else was 7 in 10 for some of these black African camps in the Boer War.
That's wild.
Yeah. just to end it off, like, before World War I, in 1904, there was a German hetero and Namaquah genocide. And again, like, I'm just going to touch on this for a second. Like, between 24,000 and 100,000 heteros or 10,000 Nama people died as a retaliation of basically the hetero people trying to fight against their German oppressors. So they fought against their German oppressors. They ended up killing about 100 men, and in return, tens of thousands of them died and were put into camps and were used as slave labor.
Yikes.
So you see how this is starting to ramp up as we're perhaps going into the second part of this episode is... Mm-hmm. Like, we've had 3 instances of concentration camps pop up in 10 years.
Yeah.
Like, in different places on the globe. Different nations are starting to think that this is a good idea of how to handle enemy combatants, of how to handle enemy civilians. It's starting to pop up more. It's becoming easier because it's easier to build these places and easier to guard them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It heavily related to all of the technology that had been developed, the barbed wire, the machine guns, and all that going on. Yeah. It's not a coincidence that it's popping up in different places. It's just it's a really effective way to control people.
Right.
So.
Yikes.
Yeah. So this isn't like a regular like multi-part series where it's going to be like episode 107 ABC. We're doing a series on this where we're splitting these episodes into kind of like separate departments, and this is going to be our one on the early birth of concentration camps and how they emerged out of like humanity. And next episode it's not going to get better because that industrialization and that
this makes it even easier.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about the concentration camps of the world wars,
both in allied countries and also the Axis powers.
Yeah, and that's a lesson we're going to learn next episode and in coming episode. A lot of fingers are pointed at Germany for the Holocaust, but there's a lot of concentration camps that are used by every nation, including happy old socialist paradise Canada.
Yep.
I was being sarcastic.
Well, Val and I are both Ukrainian. We know all about that.
Oh, yeah.
All about it. Bad times, people.
Yeah.
Bad times.
Yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts, Bambi?
I think we've covered what we intended to with the pre-World War concentration camps.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't get better.
Yeah. Tune in. We're in the 130s by the time this come out. By the time we reach the 200s, we'll have this series covered. So stay tuned, and you'll learn more about just how humanity has decided to handle large groups of people that they don't like in the past. For Occultae Veritatis, I'm Ood Gallifrey.
Sage Murray.
Richard Bigley.
Bambi.
And Valhalla.
And Leon Failure.
I was going to say also, like, this has been a pretty bummer of an episode. If you're looking for a little bit of an upper, feel free to check out my podcast, Catastrophes Notwithstanding.
Yes.
It's your good news comedy podcast. We talk about good things going on in the world and all the ways they're going to go terribly wrong.
Or pop some oxycodone. That'll bring you up as well.
Or listen to Bambi's podcast, or else I'll flay you alive.
Yeah. You heard it first. Yeah, it's the yin to our yang. You need a little lightness to appreciate the dark.
Yeah,
and vice versa.
Catastrophes Notwithstanding. Definitely check it out wherever you find your podcast.
So it's like kicking at the darkness till it bleeds daylight. Then
okay.
And that daylight is Bambi,
and he's a delight.
He's smiling at me, and it warms my heart.
I know. Okay, love you. I want to eat pizza. Bye.
Bye.
Boom. Pizza time.
Playing us out this episode, a band you should check out more of if you like the sound of their old soul. This is Old Machine from Dirty and the Perks. Enjoy and see you in the after show.
living hard since the day we turned 16. There ain't much soul left in this old machine. Busted gears don't twist right. We broke one too many teeth. Kissing it hard, biting the curb, chewing on the dirt. Slick white gap tooth smile to match those faded memories. I'll call it a waste, call it a win. Everybody burns. Well, there's still time to set your soul on fire. Never gonna put my baby in the ground. We can make it work again, but it won't be like before. Once it's in the light, they never are. And it might take a lifetime, but this peace can be restored. Strip it down and sand out all those scars. Gold machine. Sitting south of empty, every dial on this dash. She begging for change, stuck in her ways, steady as she goes. How steady she goes. Wise men do dark deeds behind the charcoal tinted glass. It's starting to crack, you're flat in your back, and everybody knows. Oh, everybody knows. There's still time to set your soul on fire. Never gonna put my baby in the ground. We can make it work again, but it won't be like before. Once they see the light, they never are. And it might take a lifetime, but this peace can be restored. Strip it down and sand out all those scars. Gold machine. There ain't much soul left in this old machine. There's some soul left in this thing. There ain't much soul left in this old machine. There ain't much soul left in this old machine. There ain't much soul left in this old machine. We can make it work again, but it won't be like before. Once they see the light, they never are. And it might take a lifetime, but this peace can be restored. Strip it down and sand out all those scars. Gold machine. 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 Gold machine.
Hi, it's Leon Filger. I'm stoned out of my skull because I smoked half of this giant 1 gram joint by myself. And I got to have some serious talk with you real quick. It's about the Patreon. We need you to join it. Some of the benefits include getting episodes early, getting all kinds of special content. There's masturbation and cum cakes and incredible things like that. The more we can support ourselves through the Patreon, the more time we can devote to researching more episodes for you. It's critically important that if you're able to, you join the Patreon for as little as $1 a month. You can support us in what we're doing so that we can stay as independent as possible without accepting other corporate sponsors. So please get on with the Patreon, $1 a month, help us out and support independent media.